A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was staring at my battery percentage this morning, watching it tick down from 92% to 91%, just because I had the audacity to check the weather, and it felt like watching a countdown clock for my social relevance. It is late March 2026. We have folding screens that can survive 100,000 bends, satellite SOS that works from the middle of the Pacific, and cameras that can literally see the craters on the moon. Yet I am still tethered to a wall like a Victorian radiator every single evening. It is the one part of the experience that feels completely stuck in the past.
It is the ultimate modern paradox, corn. We have achieved incredible feats in compute and display technology, but we are still essentially carrying around a chemical sandwich that has not fundamentally changed its recipe in decades. Herman Poppleberry here, and I have spent the last few days digging into the white papers on why that sandwich is so stubborn. Today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly this, the electrochemical and physical bottlenecks preventing smartphone battery density from scaling, and whether we will ever actually see that mythical week-long battery life.
Daniel is really hitting on the one thing that unites every smartphone user in a state of constant low-level anxiety. We have these supercomputers in our pockets, but they are powered by technology that feels increasingly like it belongs in a museum compared to the 2-nanometer chips they are running. Why is it that my charging speed has gone from 5 watts to 240 watts in just a few years, but the actual capacity of the battery feels like it is stuck in a permanent traffic jam? It is like we have a faster gas pump, but the gas tank hasn't grown an inch since 2014.
The divergence between charging speed and energy density is one of the most fascinating engineering trade-offs in consumer electronics. To understand why capacity has stagnated, we have to look at the difference between power delivery and energy storage. Charging speed is largely a matter of thermal management and infrastructure. As we discussed in episode 773, The Rise of Gallium Nitride, or GaN, chargers allowed us to move the heat-generating components out of the phone and into the brick. We can push a massive amount of current into a battery if we are clever about how we manage the heat and the voltage conversion. But energy density, the actual amount of energy we can cram into a specific volume, is a hard limit dictated by the laws of physics and chemistry.
So you are saying it is easier to fill a bucket faster than it is to make the bucket bigger without changing its outside dimensions. But why can't we just make the bucket bigger? We call it the smartphone envelope, right?
The smartphone envelope is the physical volume we are allowed to work with. In 2026, the average flagship is still roughly 7 to 8 millimeters thick. Within that space, the battery has to compete with camera modules that are getting physically larger to accommodate better sensors, haptic engines, and complex cooling systems for those high-performance chips. We have hit a density wall. While transistor density follows Moore's law, doubling every couple of years, lithium-ion energy density has been improving at a rate of only 3 to 5% annually for the last decade. Compare that to the 20 or 30% annual improvement we see in silicon logic, and you can see why the battery feels like it is falling behind.
3 to 5%? That is a rounding error. At that rate, my battery in 2030 will only be about 15% better than it is now. That is depressing, Herman. Why is chemistry so much slower than silicon?
Because in silicon, we are just moving electrons and shrinking features. In a battery, we are moving physical atoms, lithium ions, back and forth between an anode and a cathode through a medium. You cannot shrink a lithium atom. You are limited by the atomic weight and the number of electrons each atom can trade. The primary bottleneck right now is the anode. For the better part of 30 years, we have used graphite anodes. Graphite is great because it is stable and cheap, but it has a theoretical limit for how many lithium ions it can hold. To move past that, the industry has been trying to shift towards silicon-anode composites.
I have heard about silicon anodes for years. It is always the next big thing that is just 6 months away. What is the holdup? Is silicon just playing hard to get?
Silicon is a high-maintenance material. A silicon anode can theoretically hold 10 times more lithium ions than a graphite one, which sounds like the holy grail for battery life. However, when silicon absorbs those lithium ions during a charge cycle, it swells. We are talking about a volumetric expansion of up to 300 or even 400%. Imagine your phone's battery suddenly quadrupling in thickness inside a glass and metal chassis that has zero room for error.
That sounds like a recipe for a very expensive, very dangerous pocket fire. I'm guessing the phone manufacturers are not keen on their devices turning into literal popcorn.
That is the primary physical constraint. If the anode expands and then shrinks every time you charge it, the material eventually cracks and pulverizes. This destroys what we call the solid electrolyte interface, or the SEI layer. Think of the SEI as a protective skin that forms on the anode. If that skin keeps breaking and reforming, it consumes the liquid electrolyte and the active lithium, which is why the battery starts losing capacity after just a few hundred cycles. Currently, as of early 2026, most commercial silicon anode phones only use a small percentage of silicon, maybe 10 to 15%, mixed with graphite. It is a compromise to get a tiny bit more density without the phone exploding like a pufferfish.
It feels like we are hitting a wall where the desire for a thin, sleek phone is actively fighting against our desire for a phone that actually stays on. We want the 7mm thick slab, but we also want it to last 3 days. Is there a world where we just accept that phones need to be thicker, or is the thermal issue still going to kill us?
Even if you made the phone twice as thick, you would run into a diminishing return on thermal dissipation. A larger battery generates more internal resistance and more heat during those high-speed charging sessions Daniel mentioned. If you cannot get that heat out of the center of the battery stack, you accelerate the degradation of the cathode. In 2026, the industry is moving toward 2-nanometer chipsets, which are incredibly power efficient on paper. But as we explored in episode 1595 regarding the Android paradox, that efficiency is almost immediately eaten up by other components.
It is the classic lifestyle creep of technology. Your boss gives you a 5% raise, and you immediately find a way to spend 7% more on artisanal coffee and streaming services. We get a more efficient processor, and the software engineers say, "Great, now we can run a more complex large language model in the background to predict when the user wants to see a picture of a cat."
The software overhead is the hidden battery drainer. Even if we had a breakthrough in hardware tomorrow that doubled energy density, the software ecosystem would likely find a way to utilize that overhead within 2 years. We have screens that hit 3000 nits of brightness and refresh at 120 Hz, plus always, on AI agents that are constantly polling sensors and running background inference. In 2024, a flagship might have had a 5000 mAh battery. In 2026, many flagships still have that same 5000 mAh capacity, but they are doing twice as much background work.
So the week-long battery is a myth because we keep moving the goalposts. If I took a modern battery and put it in a phone from 2010, it would probably last a month. But because I want my phone to be a genius that anticipates my every move, it dies by 10 p.m.
To get a full week of charge on a device with the current performance expectations of a flagship phone, we would need an energy density improvement of roughly 500%. Given that 3 to 5% annual growth rate, the math is pretty grim. This is why many people are pinning their hopes on solid-state batteries.
Right, solid state. The fusion power of the mobile world. It is always 10 years away. Where are we actually with that in 2026? Is it still just a cool lab experiment, or are we seeing real movement?
We are seeing the first small-scale production lines for solid-state cells, but the manufacturing yield is the primary hurdle. In a traditional lithium-ion battery, you have a liquid electrolyte that fills all the nooks and crannies between the anode and cathode. It is very forgiving. In a solid-state battery, you replace that liquid with a solid ceramic or polymer separator. The challenge is maintaining perfect contact between those solid layers as the battery undergoes thermal expansion and contraction. If a tiny gap forms, the battery's internal resistance spikes and it stops working.
So it is like trying to keep two pieces of toast perfectly pressed together while they are being heated and cooled, without using any butter to fill the gaps.
That is actually a very apt analogy. If you get it right, solid-state batteries offer much higher energy density because you can use a pure lithium metal anode, which is the ultimate goal. Lithium metal anodes would give us that massive jump in capacity Daniel is asking about. They are also much safer because there is no flammable liquid electrolyte to leak out if the battery is punctured. But until we can manufacture these at a scale of millions of units per month with high yields, they will remain limited to niche applications or ultra-luxury vehicles. For the average smartphone user in 2026 or 2027, solid state is still a premium dream.
What about the efficiency of the other parts of the phone? If the battery is stuck in the slow lane, can we just make everything else so efficient that it does not matter? I mean, we have these new 2-nanometer chips. Surely they are doing some of the heavy lifting.
They are, but we are also seeing a shift in how we use our devices. In 2026, your phone isn't just a communication tool, it is a sensor hub. It is constantly listening for wake words, tracking your movement for health data, and keeping a high bandwidth connection to 50G or 6G networks. The radio alone is a massive power sink. Even if the processor is using less power per operation, we are asking it to do 10 times more operations than we did 5 years ago. This is the core of the Android paradox we discussed in episode 1595. The more efficient the hardware becomes, the more the operating system feels entitled to use that efficiency for background tasks like indexing your photos or preloading apps.
It feels like we are in this weird transition period where we have given up on the 1-week battery and instead accepted the top-up culture. Everyone has a power bank in their bag or a wireless charger on their desk. We are basically living like electric cars, just hopping from one charging station to the next.
That top-up culture is actually reinforced by the fast-charging tech Daniel mentioned. When you can get 50% of your battery back in 10 minutes using a 240-watt charger, the psychological need for a 3-day battery diminishes for most people. The manufacturers have realized that it is cheaper and easier to give you a faster charger than it is to invent a new chemistry, but there is a hidden cost to this, which is cycle life. High-speed charging puts a lot of stress on the battery's internal structure. If you are blasting 200 watts into a phone every day, you are going to see significant capacity fade much sooner than if you were slow charging it overnight.
So we are trading long-term health for short-term convenience. It is the energy drink approach to battery management. You feel great for an hour, but your heart is doing things it probably shouldn't be doing.
Precisely. And this leads to a practical takeaway for anyone listening who wants to make their current phone last. If you do not need that ultra-fast charge, do not use it every time. Most modern phones now support the USB-C power delivery, or PD standards, specifically the Programmable Power Supply, or PPS, protocol. This allows the phone to communicate with the charger to request the exact voltage and current it needs, which minimizes heat. If you have the option, use a charger that supports PPS and set your phone to a slower charging mode for overnight use.
It is interesting that you mention the 80% limit. I have noticed more people doing that, but it feels counterintuitive. If I already feel like I do not have enough battery, why would I voluntarily give up 20% of it?
Because the last 20% of a charge cycle is the most taxing on the battery chemistry. It requires higher voltage to cram those final lithium ions into the anode, which generates more heat and causes more mechanical stress. By staying between 20 and 80%, you can often double the number of total charge cycles the battery can handle before it drops below 80% of its original capacity. In a world where phone hardware is peaking and people are holding onto their devices for 4 or 5 years, battery longevity is becoming more important than raw daily capacity.
Let's talk about the future, though. Daniel asked when we can expect a full week. If the 3 to 5% annual improvement holds, and we need a 500% jump, the math says we are looking at roughly 50 to 80 years. That cannot be right. There has to be a leapfrog technology. What about energy harvesting? Can my phone just eat the ambient Wi-Fi signals in the air to stay alive?
Ambient RF harvesting is a real thing, but the power levels are incredibly low. We are talking about microwatts. That might be enough to keep a low-power temperature sensor alive in a smart home, but it is nowhere near enough to power a modern smartphone display, which can pull several watts on its own. Kinetic charging, where the movement of your body charges the phone, also falls short. You would have to run a marathon just to get enough power for a 10-minute phone call.
Well, there goes my plan to charge my phone by just being a very restless sleeper. So, if harvesting is out and solid state is still years away, what is the realistic forecast? Are we just going to keep seeing these incremental bumps until something radical like graphene batteries becomes viable?
Graphene is another one of those wonder materials that is great in the lab but hard to mass produce. It is an excellent conductor of heat and electricity, which could help with the charging speed and thermal issues, but it doesn't necessarily solve the energy density problem on its own. The most likely scenario for the next 5 years is the continued refinement of silicon-anode composites. We will probably see batteries go from 5,000 milliamp hours to maybe 6 or 7,000 in the same footprint. That might get a light user through 2 or 3 days, but for a power user, it is still a nightly charge.
It feels like the industry has collectively decided that the one-day battery is the standard, and they are building the entire ecosystem around that assumption. It is like the 8-hour workday. It might not be optimal, but it is the framework everything else is plugged into.
That is a very astute observation. The entire infrastructure of our lives, from the USB-C ports in airplanes and buses to the power banks we carry, is designed around the one-day cycle. Breaking out of that would require a fundamental shift in how we value device thickness and weight. If a company released a phone today that was 15 millimeters thick but lasted 4 days, most reviewers would call it a brick and it would struggle to sell. We are victims of our own aesthetic preferences.
I would take the brick. Give me the sloth phone. It is thick, it is slow to move, but it has enough energy to last through a long nap. I think there is a market for that. But maybe it is just people like me who are tired of carrying cables everywhere.
There is a niche market for rugged phones that do exactly that, but they often compromise on the screen and the processor quality. The challenge is bringing that longevity to the flagship experience. One thing to watch is the shift toward more efficient display technologies. We are seeing developments in micro LED and more efficient backplanes that could shave another 10 or 15% off the total power draw. When you combine that with a 2-nanometer or even a 1.4-nanometer chip, you start to see a path toward a genuine 2-day battery for everyone. But a week? That remains in the realm of science fiction for now.
So the answer to Daniel's question is essentially, don't hold your breath for the week-long battery, unless you are willing to go back to a Nokia 3310 that only plays Snake and sends text messages.
Or, unless we see a total breakthrough in room temperature superconductors or some other black swan event in material science. But based on the electrochemical bottlenecks we are dealing with today, the focus is going to remain on making the charging process so seamless and fast that you forget you are even doing it. We are moving toward a world of invisible charging, where your phone picks up power from the desk you sit at or the car seat you sit in, rather than one where the battery itself is a bottomless well.
It is a bit like the internet. We used to worry about downloading files and managing storage, and now everything is just streamed and always available. Maybe power will become a stream rather than a reservoir.
That is a great way to put it. We are moving from a storage-centric power model to a delivery-centric one. And while that might not satisfy the person who wants to go camping for a week without a power bank, it solves the problem for 99% of urban users. The bottleneck isn't just the battery, it is our expectations of what a phone should look and feel like.
Well, I suppose I will keep my power bank in my bag for now. It is my emotional support battery. Before we wrap up, what is the one thing people should look for in their next phone if they actually care about battery life? Is it just the milliamp hour number?
No, the milliamp hour number can be misleading. You should look at the efficiency rating of the SoC or system on a chip and the type of display panel. A phone with a slightly smaller battery but a more efficient processor and an LTPO display, which can drop its refresh rate to 1 Hz when you are not moving the screen, will often outlast a phone with a massive battery and an unoptimized chipset. Efficiency is the new capacity.
Efficiency is the new capacity. I like that. It sounds like something a very organized donkey would say. I will try to be more efficient with my own energy today, which mostly means taking a longer nap so I don't have to eat as much.
That is certainly one way to manage your internal energy density. It has been a pleasure diving into the chemistry of this. There is something deeply humbling about the fact that our most advanced technology is still limited by how many lithium atoms we can stuff into a tiny piece of metal.
It keeps us grounded. Literally because we are always plugged into a wall. Thanks for the deep dive, Herman. And thanks to Daniel for the prompt that reminded me I need to go find my charger. This has been My Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying the show, we would love it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other people find our strange little corner of the internet.
Big thanks to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a huge thank you to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. Their serverless infrastructure is a lot more efficient than my old phone's battery, that is for sure.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive and all the links to subscribe. We will be back soon with another deep dive into whatever Daniel throws our way.
See you then.
Stay charged, everyone, or at least stay at 80%. Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and fall.